if they can't even, get my father back home, then that tells you all you need to know about the relationship and all you need to know about how China thinks of us.
The Prime Minister saying that China's status as one of the world's biggest economic players means it matters to the UK whether people like it or not. He's also promising to raise potentially tricky issues, including human rights, with the Chinese government on his latest visit. He was responding to a question about the jailed British citizen and pro-democracy campaigner Jimmy Lai, but he didn't actually name Mr Lai in his reply. The issue, though, was raised in Deputy Prime Minister's questions today by the Lib Dems' Daisy Cooper.
Whilst the Chinese regime still holds British citizen Jimmy Lai captive in prison, and whilst the Chinese regime continues to hunt down pro-democracy protesters on the streets of Britain with bounties on their heads, the British Prime Minister has gone cap in hand to China to ask for a trade deal on the promise of a super embassy from which the Chinese regime will continue to spy on us.
Well, let's talk now to Sebastian Lai, who is Jimmy Lai's son. Sebastian, a very good afternoon from us. First of all, when was the last time that you spoke to your father, and how is he doing?
The last time I spoke to my father was at the end of 2020. Because I campaign on his behalf, I haven't been able to go back to Hong Kong, unfortunately. From my understanding, he's not doing well. This is a 78-year-old who's been in solitary confinement this whole time, more than 5 years, 1,800 days, when 14 days of solitary confinement is considered, a form of torture. He's got heart issues because of this. He just, over the last year alone, lost 10 kilograms. We're really worried about him, and from my understanding, it doesn't seem like he's got much time left, unfortunately.
How do you get your news about him?
So there's multiple sources. One of them is obviously because he's been on trial since 2020 to 2023. People have been able to see him, so people could see physically how much he has deteriorated. People could also see that though physically he has deteriorated, he seems to be still strong, still resolute, knowing that he did the right thing. He also gets visits from people. He's allowed visits 4 times a month. So unfortunately, unfortunately, the information that I get on his health is never positive. It's
Sure.
only been declining.
Well, we are really sorry about that, and we will talk more over the next 10 minutes or so, particularly about his state of health. But do you know if your father is hopeful of Keir Starmer's visit changing his status and his situation?
I can't speak on his behalf, obviously, but I am hopeful. Look, the Prime Minister has said that my father's case is a priority. You would have just heard the multiple worries that we have about national security in this country. We just gave them, this government just gave them this huge embassy in the middle of London, and the least they could do is put a 78-year-old man who's in terrible health conditions, who the international community has called out for his release, our country has called out for his release, on a plane and send him back to London. That seems like a very, it seems to be a very easy, I shouldn't use the word easy, but it seems to be a very simple thing for the Hong Kong and Chinese government to do if we're talking about normalization of relationships.
Sure. So do you think that actually that was the point at which some leverage could have been imposed upon China? And I hate to say it, but the fact that it wasn't means that your father's case really isn't going to be any more of a priority during this visit.
That is the worry. This is a litmus test for this government. They talk about warming relationship with China, and that will be helpful for trade. But also, if we talk about a relationship with China, then it's also helpful to raise human rights issues. I think that's the line they use. Well, if they can't even get my father back home, then that tells you all you need to know about the relationship and all you need to know about how China thinks of us.
Why is your father of such importance to the Chinese government?
My father Well, my father was a man who has been campaigning for democracy and for the free press for the last 30 years. He did so peacefully. He did so because it was the right thing to do. That's what they found in the trial. But he was he is this real moral figure, someone who, was very successful in business, but thought, well, the additional dollar doesn't really matter. And he felt a responsibility, a need to protect and further the freedoms of Hong Kong, a place that has given him so much. When he landed there as a 12-year-old, he had nothing. But in Hong Kong, there were the freedoms that we as a nation instituted, and he blossomed under those freedoms, and he felt the need to give back. And when push came to shove, when the passing of the national security law happened in 2020, he knew that, as he said, if I leave, I live comfortably, but if I stay, I live meaningfully, because he knew that by staying, not only would he be defending those freedoms, those principles, but he'd also be defending his journalists and other people who campaigned with him. So it's just an incredibly courageous story. As to why they're so obsessed with him, I honestly don't think they're that obsessed, because look, they had all these allegations going into the trial, right? That he was kind of this black hand behind the protest, that he was, colluding with foreign forces. But all that they have found was that, was he a black hand? No, because he always, publicly and privately asked for peace. That was the only time he ever met with students, would tell them to be peaceful. And collusion suggests some nefarious benefit. And they have found, after 5 years of ruffling through all this stuff, after all these trials where there's allegations of witnesses being tortured, that the only benefit he would have had was democracy in Hong Kong, was one vote, and the knowledge that with his life, with his work, he would have made Hong Kong a freer and better place. So there's no benefit in keeping him there anymore.
If your father was released, though, would it act as a lightning rod for more protests by Hong Kongers? I
honestly don't believe so. Look, he's had everything taken away from him. I don't think, this idea that his what's happening to him is a deterrent. I think it's silly. Look, it's been 5 years. His health is destroyed. They've taken his business. That's the deterrent there. If you kill him, he'll become a martyr. If he dies in jail, then symbolically he's always, that's a black mark on both Hong Kong as a financial center, as a place that had rule of law, and on China as well.
I did want to ask you about that, Sebastian, but I'm so painfully aware, this is a person that you love dearly. But I mean, from the outside looking in, you can understand how a regime that doesn't want your dad out and about being free might think this is a man who is very ill. Let's just let him die where he is. And you must think that every day now.
Yeah, look, I think there is some hope because as I was saying, all the evidence is out. There's nothing that really incriminates him. But obviously, they're very happy to as you said, they're very happy to kind of just ignore it and let him die because they don't work on the basis of evidence. And that's why it's so important for the Prime Minister to push and to put conditionalities on my father's release. What's happening to him is not just shameful. It's completely disgusting, the way he's being treated, the way that he has been treated for the last 5 years. And that's not anything that we ever want to normalize with any country. In fact, it shows, if we're talking about a relationship with a country, it's an equal relationship. We're not subservient to any nations. And so releasing my father would be this litmus test, would be this thing that Hong Kong and China can do. They could do that within 2 hours, put him on a plane and send him back.
And would he want to come back here, or do you mean he'd go back to Hong Kong?
I believe he... Look, my father loves London, he loves England, he loves Great Britain, but the reason why he decided to stay in Hong Kong back then was to protect his staff. He's done his duty and suffered greatly for it. Something I'm incredibly proud of. But he's done that at this point in his life, at 78. I think most people listening to this knows that this man who's given so much for freedom deserves a little bit of freedom himself, deserves to play with his grandchildren, have lunch with my mum, and just smile.
Yeah, and see you as well, Sebastian. Spend some time with you. When you make representations to the current government, who are you welcomed by? Is everybody taking your call? Are you at liberty to tell us what you have been told, or is there no contact for you?
Look, we've met many people in the SCDO that have been very supportive. It seems like this is a case that, personally people care about. I've met the Foreign Secretary. I've also met with the Prime Minister, as the Foreign Secretary said, in PMQs, not PMQs, sorry, in Parliament. So it does seem like this is something that that the government wants to get done. It's more a question of, how strong are they willing to press it, right? Is this something that they, what I'm afraid of is that it just becomes this kind of passing conversation that they talk about, and then they talk about, all the stuff that trade or whatnot, or do they put the values that my father have stood for, the values that unite us as a country, first and foremost, which I believe they should.
What is your feeling about what might happen over the next couple of days?
Honestly, I have no idea. I just know that, whatever happens would be a very good indication for every single person in this country about the state of both our relationship with China, how China views our individual freedoms, how China views our individual security, and how willing and able we are as a country to defend those freedoms.
How would your father report this very case if it wasn't him at the centre of it?
I think he'd be very, again, hard for me to speak on his behalf, but most journalists that I've spoken to about my father's case is incredibly moved by it. I mean, I think, most people who work in press sometimes have a negative connotation to press owners. And when they see someone like my father who, decides to stay to defend his people, despite obviously tremendous risk, I think a lot of people see that, and not just journalists. I think a lot of people see that and are very moved and see the importance of this case for the liberty that we hold, because if we just talk about liberties and don't actually act out on them the same way my father has, then they just become words in the air, and these kind of autocratic countries, these tyrants, start treading on them and start taking them bit by bit, and that's why it's so important to have someone like my father stand up for these freedoms and further them.
It's very good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us today. That's Sebastian Lai, who is Jimmy Lai's son.